this is a lapped zipper. We have a overlap. That's why they call it a lapped zipper, I think. The zipper is behind this lapped fabric right here. So you can open and close. And these are basically the tools that we need to put it in. Seam gauge, chalk, regular presser foot, zipper presser foot. Let's do a lapped zipper. It uses a regular zipper, and this is our practice fabric for our zipper sample. First thing you do is you mark the bottom of the zipper. Remember, if your zipper is super long, you can pull this up, set it in like that, and then later come back and finish off that top edge. But if you can put it in like this, then you don't have to worry about sewing around this zipper pull, which can be hard sometimes. Other thing to remember is where you're going to sew across the bottom. Do you want to go under the zipper stop, or do you want to go over the zipper stop? Do you like to end your zipper like that, or do you like to end your zipper like this? I'm going this way because it's a little safer as far as not breaking your needle when you sew across the bottom. But if you prefer like that, go for it. Just sew slowly when you're sewing across the metal zipper teeth, okay? So, first step after marking that bottom is to sew with a basting stitch along here all the way down to your mark, and then to continue with your regular stitch. We're going to use our seam allowance.
I thought you loved me, now I'm stuck.
Alright, I have sewn with a basting stitch all the way down to my mark, back stitched, and shortened my stitch length, gone all the way down. And I have clipped about every inch, half an inch or so of the basting stitches, and that is a prep. That's in preparation for later on. Then we're going to open this up and press our seam allowance flat. Then we need to come back and we need to think about this for a minute. Which side is our front, which side is our back? In a lapped zipper, there's going to be a flap. One big flap, and the other side is pretty straight, pretty flat. But there is this flap here that if this is on the side of your garment, you don't want this flap to be facing the front. Otherwise, it's going to open up all the time. You want the flap to be facing the back of your garment. Okay? So if this is center back seam, like along your back or the back of the skirt, it doesn't really matter which way it flaps, unless you have a personal preference. But if it is on the side of your garment, you want the flap side to be with the front, okay? So for this example, I'm just gonna go ahead and say, I'm gonna pretend like this is a skirt and I want it on my left side. So the flap is going to be on this side, this will be my front, and this will be my back. So, now what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the back first. We line up the top of the zipper with the top raw edge of this fabric, and then we're going to lay down the teeth right along the side, not on top of the seam, on the side of the seam, all the way down. Follow and make sure the teeth are on the side of the seam. And then we're gonna pull what we're going to do is we're going to go to the machine and sew the zipper tape to our seam allowance only. I'm going to use a long stitch for this part, and I'm going to take the time to pin it to make sure that my teeth don't slide around and get on top of that seam. I want them beside. Okay, let's pin.
Break the news, and I know that I'm gonna lose. You got your break.
Alright, so I sewed the zipper tape to the seam allowance. Now what we're going to do is we're going to turn back the seam allowance like this. But what we're going to do is we're going to get the fold as close to the teeth as possible. We're going to get the teeth as close as possible, and then we're going to stitch down right there along that fold right beside the teeth all the way down. Okay? I'm probably going to sew in this direction all the way up, and I'm probably going to need to move my zipper stop once I get there. We'll see how that goes. I'm going to change my stitch length to 3 or 2.5, and I'm going to back stitch because this is permanent stitching. I want it to stay. And let's go. Alright, with the needle down, I'm going to lift up my presser foot, and I'm going to see if I can scoop this back. Usually you can, but it takes a little fiddling. There we go. Now I'm free to continue. Back stitch. I got a little jog there. I'm going to fix that. I'm using different color thread in this sample so you can see what I'm doing better. But of course it shows every little problem. That's better. So I'll just unpick that little part right there, and then it'll look better. Alright, so I did that step. Next thing is we're going to put that up, and we're going to point that zipper pull up so we can reach it if we need to later on. Then we're going to fold over that top and smooth it as flat as possible. I'm going to find that zipper stop. Zipper stop is here. Oh, yep, right there. So I'm going to mark the bottom so I know where that is. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to get a needle and thread. I'm going to baste across the bottom and then up the top. And we're going to stay about 1/2 inch away from the seam for our basting. And then after we baste it, we're going to take the sewing machine and start here across, follow the basting stitch all the way up. The tricky part here is you have to make sure that that seam that you make catches both the zipper tape and your seam allowance. Some people like to do a lapped zipper with a larger seam allowance, and I think that would be a pretty smart thing to do. Maybe increase it to 1 inch or something if you need to, if you need that extra overlap. that my seam allowance goes all the way where I want it to go to sew. So it looks like I'm going to need to sew right inside where I did my basting stitch to really get that seam allowance nicely, because you can just barely see it in places. And if I look on this side, I can see that if I sew inside where I placed my basting stitches, I'm not going to be running into my teeth, so it's going to be okay if I'm just inside all the way down. Alright, let's sew. As I near the top, I'm going to run into that zipper stop right there. So, since I already unpicked a couple of these stitches up here, I'm going to pull some out so I can get to the zipper stop, and I'm going to move it back down out of my way. Alright, so with my needle down, I'm going to pull this back. There we go. Now I can finish this. Great. Okay, so let's finish taking out this basting we put in to begin with.
Why don't you come?
Okay, then we'll take out our red basting thread.
You know it's true.
Alright, so here's our left zipper. And we zip it down, up, and the back side. And we did do it right. The front has the long flap. So this is the front of our skirt, this is the back of our skirt, and it flows nicely along our side seam. Good job. This is the back of our lap zipper, and you'll notice that the bottom seam allowance, you can't really lay it flat because of how we put this in. The back seam allowance does have that crease in it, and we're just going to have to press that as flat as possible, like that. But don't be alarmed, you didn't do anything wrong. That's just how it's supposed to be.
Trust in